Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Father-Son Packers podcast, your source for Packers news, notes, and analysis. My name is Tommy, and I'm one of your hosts, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, my dad, Matt. Dad, how you doing? A little sick, but you're battling through it.
I've got my first ever bout of COVID.
Yep.
So
you had made it a ways. You were doing quite well.
A long time.
I had my first bout last year, so you beat me by a bit.
Thank my brother, who also gave me my first ever case of chicken pox.
He's just continuing the the trend.
Whatever other diseases are out there that I never had, the list is long. So
yeah, you can count on Tom to get you.
I think to heap a little more guilt on him. Maybe he'll feel a little worse.
Exactly. But anyway, you are powering through it here today.
I'm not feeling terrible, but I'm like, maybe it's a good thing I'm sitting down while we're recording this.
I mean, it's not like you stand for all our other ones, but fair enough. We can get you like a lazy boy, have you really reclined if you want.
I should set this up so I could do it from bed.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that would have been even perfect. You can have the arm of the microphone just like hang over you. It'd be perfect. But we are here today, like you said, powering through. We are going to start our bit of, we're in the dead of the off season, so we figure we start doing some of our picking up for predictions into the 2025 season, and we figured there's no better place to start than looking at our own division. So this is going to be the first of our two-parters. We'll do the second part next week, looking at the NFC North as a division, and we're going to start with looking at the defense. We're going to be comparing how the Packers stack up against these other teams in the division at each position group. So we're going to look at how they stack up along the interior defensive line. We're going to talk a little bit about our methodology for comparing them in a little bit, but we'll do that in just a second when we get to it. But looking at interior defensive line, edges, corners, safeties, linebackers, every other position group you could think of. But so we're going to start with the defense today. We're going to do the offense next week. Talking about who's coming into these teams, who's leaving these teams, what the big additions are, coaching staff changes, not quite the minutia of like, oh, well, the Packers are changing linebacker coaches from Campanile to Dugan or stuff like that. But just, imagine that those
or that bit of like extreme detail that we know for the Packers, but we don't really know for the other teams.
Well, we figured we could, but you look at the Bears are changing their entire coaching staff. So we could talk about every single one of the coaching hires that they made and the impact of them, but we figured that might be a little bit too in-depth for something like this. Yeah. Although,
we're not going to go to that level of detail for the Bears.
Exactly. But anyway, so we're going to be talking about the defense here today, and we're going to be breaking that down. Before we get into any of that, though, just wanted to pitch a couple of things. If you like what you heard, subscribe, whether that's Spotify, Apple, YouTube. We're doing an episode every single week for the rest of the offseason, and then once the season kicks up, we'll be doing 2 a weeks. So check those out. Leave a comment, leave a review, tell a friend, etc., etc. Follow us on Blue Sky at Father-Son Packer for when new episodes are out, content from other Packers content creators, Packers news, whether that's roster moves, updates, training camp schedules just out, so check that out as well. But anyway, once again, at Father-Son Packer on Blue Sky. Follow us on all the platforms. Leave a review, leave a comment, tell a friend. Before we get into talking about the defense specifically, though, do have a couple of pieces of Packers-related news, Dad, so we're going to bounce these off of you really quick before we get into the meat and potatoes. The first is that Jair Alexander has officially signed with, drumroll please, the Ravens, which I think is probably best case scenario for everyone because as Packers fans, we don't need to worry about him on an NFC rival where he inevitably would have played 17 plus games and played like an all-pro, and we can root for him with the Ravens, and then he gets to go play with Lamar, who was his college teammate. They're very close friends, so that's going to be exciting. I think it's a win-win for both Packers fans and for Jair. Signed there for a 1-year deal, $4 million with incentives up to $6 million. Reportedly took less to play with the Ravens, so there were some offers out there that were maybe a little bit more. But Dad, what were your thoughts when this news came down?
So the Ravens were probably my number one guess where I thought he would go. This is a little less than I thought he'd get, so I don't know what the Packers offer was that he was taking $4 million.
It had to be 8 or less, I would say, right?
Oh, I'm thinking it's less than 4.
It's one of those weird things where oftentimes,
well, we won't know.
Yeah, but oftentimes a player will they'll be offered a reduced salary, and on principle, be like, we signed the contract, I'm not taking that, which, fair enough. And then they end up just signing a lesser one, but it's the principle of the thing that they didn't want to take the pay cut with the original team, even though they end up with less money anyways.
That happens.
I'm guessing they offered him reduced down to 6 with the option to gain 8. And he's like, well, I'd rather just go, play with Lamar and the Ravens and have 4 to get 6. And then I imagine if he has a good year, he ends up signing like one last decent deal like after this with some other team. And assuming this season goes well for him and he's able to stay out there, hopefully. And because right now, I mean, this is a brief aside, that Ravens secondary is pretty nasty. Like when you look at the first five, because it's obviously Kyle Hamilton, who I think most people would agree is one of the best safeties, if not the best safety in the league. I would say one of the best defensive players in the league. Malachi Starks, who they just took in the first round, who a lot of people were really high on in the draft. And then at corner, you got Nate Wiggins, who was a first-round pick last year, who had a pretty solid rookie year on one side. You got Jair Alexander on the other side, and you got Marlon Humphrey, who's multiple-time Pro Bowler in the slot. Is that the best secondary in the NFL? It might be.
Yeah, it just seems like great players keep falling to the Ravens in the draft.
It is kind of funny. It's a bit of the bit where it's like, oh, he's still available. I guess we'll just scoop him up.
Definitely what happened with Hamilton.
Yes, and I mean Hamilton's the classic. I think you know what my takeaway is recently. Athletic testing might just not matter that much for safeties. It really might not, because you go back and you look. Because Hamilton, the big knock on him was like, well, like didn't really.
That's why he fell.
Didn't test that great. Brian Branch tested.
I was going to bring him up. Yeah, another guy
tested awfully, and he's been fantastic for the Lions. He's been one of the best players, best secondary players in the league. And Xavier McKinney, his testing wasn't fantastic.
No,
and so you just
not an elite tester either.
Yeah, so just look down the line. It's like, maybe athletic testing is just not that imperative for safeties, and it's more a cerebral position than we're even thinking it is. But anyway, so that was our brief Ravens aside. We can keep moving now. The other piece of news was we finally got some interviews with Ed Policy, who, if you don't know, will be taking over for Mark Murphy this coming year. Mark Murphy will be transitioning that at the owners meeting, which is like right around the beginning of training camp. Murphy has hit the mandatory retirement age, which, shout out the Packers for having a mandatory retirement age. And Ed Policy will be taking over. He's been with the organization for a long time. But kind of, it was just a lot of talking, but he mentioned something that a lot of people were getting interested in, so we figured we'd touch on it. He said the three biggest goals for the Packers are, number one, competing, putting a competitive roster out there that can compete for championships. Number two, keeping the Packers in Green Bay. And number three, staying as like a strong presence in the community. And I think number two caught a lot of people's eyes, because it's like, hold on, rewind real quick. Why is that even a conversation? It seems like a shot.
Number one,
or shouldn't that just not even need to be said?
It's so obvious.
Yeah, it's like keep the Packers in the NFL. Like that's like it feels like that almost. But I think it's mostly just a shot across the bow of the mayor, because there's all these discussions about the lease coming up in a few years and having to renew it, and Packers wanting it at a certain price because they put so much money into, the land already, with the Titletown district and stuff like that. And so it seems like one of those scenarios where it's going to get worked out. But that definitely caught a lot of people's eye, huh?
I didn't really listen to all the consternation, but I guess a lot of people were freaking out. It's like, why are you even saying this? Should we worry now? Should we worry now that you said we shouldn't worry? Why did you even say we shouldn't worry?
Well, I wasn't concerned until you said there was no reason to be concerned, but now I'm a little bit concerned.
Yeah, and that's like, what? Clearly, there's a purpose here.
Yeah,
that is not what everybody's worried about.
Yeah, and I mean he's clearly trying to just put a little extra pressure on the mayor of Green Bay, but
fire a shot across
the bow,
across the nose.
Yeah,
I said
exactly.
Across the nose, not up it.
What's that from again? I couldn't tell you. Only
what that
was.
One man in the universe would dare give me the raspberry.
It's Spaceballs. You see they're making a Spaceballs 2?
I have not seen that yet.
Mel Brooks announced they're making a Spaceballs 2.
Awesome.
The search for more money.
The search for more money. That's what they said it was going to be, yeah.
Yep.
God willing, I sure hope he puts that in the title.
That it's still the search for more money? I mean,
yes,
that would be fantastic. But anyway, he did announce they're going to make a second one, which is funny. But anyway, we've been, talking enough random stuff for a little bit. Let's start talking about what we came here to talk about, Dad, which is the NFC North and the defenses in the NFC North and what it might mean for the Packers going into 2025. So let's just talk a little bit about additions and subtractions for every team, because there were some notable moves made by each team on the defensive side of the ball, on both sides of the balls, but we'll talk about on both sides of the ball, but we'll talk about a little bit more about the offense in our next episode. But let's start off with some additions and some subtractions for each team. Starting off with the team we know the best, which is the Packers. Not a whole lot of losses on the defensive side of the ball. Lost TJ Slayton in free agency and losing Jair Alexander recently, which we've talked about ad nauseum, so we don't need to talk about it too much more, were the two big ones. So maybe a question about how that affects the run defense. They didn't really have Jair for a lot of last season, as Mark Murphy pointed out. But then they signed Nate Hobbs off the Raiders to kind of counteract some of those losses in the cornerback room. So those are the big additions, subtractions there for the Packers.
He alone is replacing both Stokes and Jair?
Yeah, Stokes gone as well. Corey Ballantyne gone as well. Some smaller things, but focusing mostly on the players who are going to, handle big snap loads, we assume, this season. Moving on over to the Lions, they lost defensive coordinator Aaron Glenn, in addition to, their offensive coordinator Ben Johnson, who we'll talk about with the Bears and with the offense in the next episode, but lost defensive coordinator Aaron Glenn to go be the head coach of the Jets, and then promoted linebacker coach Kelvin Shepard to defensive coordinator. He had previously been with them, so they kind of promoted internally there. They lost corner Carlton Davis, but replaced that by signing DJ Reed, so kind of a one-for-one replacement there. Lost to Darius Smith, who played a good chunk of snaps at edge in the second half of the year for them as they were kind of dealing with those injuries. Although they're hoping to get, Aiden Hutchinson played quite well in the couple of games he played last year, and they're hoping to get him back.
Look, everybody's saying it's like
Defensive Player of the Year.
Defensive Player of the Year candidate at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, I believe he was the betting favorite at that point.
I see they lost to Zadarius Smith, who's still, I guess, not signed anywhere.
No, they could bring him back. It's very true.
But it just makes me think of the line from when Harry Met said, "You mean Zadarius Smith is still available?"
Yeah, what's it? Is that you mean Joe's? You mean Joe's available?
Right.
As married. Turns the corner, puts it right back in the Rolodex. But so lost to Darius Smith, although, you could count some of these return from injuries as additions, so like they lost Carlton Davis, but Carlton Davis missed the end of last year with an injury anyway. So you could say they're just adding DJ Reed to the group that they had. And then lost to Darius Smith, but they're hoping to get Aiden Hutchinson back full strength from injury. So that's, an addition in some sense of the word. And then they drafted defensive tackle Tyleik Williams at Ohio State in the first round. They're expecting him to play a big role. Maybe not right away because their defensive tackle room is actually pretty good right now, although Aleem McNeil is going to be recovering from injury, which we'll talk about in a second, as he tore his ACL in the second half of last year. So that's obviously unfortunate, but hopefully he can be back full strength is what they're hoping. And he was really impactful when he did. He just, earned a massive contract, which is, great for him as well. Moving on to the Vikings. Added two big defensive tackle additions in Jonathan Allen and Javon Hargrave, who are both names that you probably know. They've been impact players in the league for a while, though they're probably in the back nine of their careers, but they're hoping that they can get some impact on them and, the last couple of good seasons from them. Lost safety Cam Bynum, which is kind of a big loss. He was a pretty important player for them last year. Also lost corner Stephon Gilmore, so losing a couple big pieces of that secondary, even though Stephon Gilmore is also getting a little bit older there. And then signed Isaiah Rodgers to kind of hopefully shore up some of the gaps lost by Gilmore. He's not nearly the player that Gilmore is, but he is a solid player. Over to the Bears, fired their whole coaching staff. So we'll talk about that a little bit more when we talk about the offense and what Ben Johnson brings.
Not necessarily a subtraction.
No, this might be addition by subtraction. But we'll talk about Ben Johnson when we talk about what that means for the offense next week, like we said. But they hired defensive coordinator, previously the head coach of the Saints, Dennis Allen, which I think is a very good hire for them. He kind of reminds me of one of those guys that's better as a coordinator than a head coach. So I think that's a really good hire for them. Also signed defensive tackle Grady Jarrett, previously with the Falcons, and then signed Dayo Adeyingbo, who is a player that we kind of had our eye on as an edge rusher previously from the Colts, but they brought him in as well. And then they drafted defensive tackle Shamar Turner in the second round. They're hoping that he can, pick up some of the slack in that defensive tackle room as well. But Ted, any thoughts on any of those additions, subtractions? I think the ones that really stick out to me are the DJ Reed signings. He's been really good for the Jets for a number of years now, so that's could be a pretty high impact signing. And then I think the additions of Allen and Hargrave, we'll talk about in a second. Those are going to be interesting. Let's wait to talk about those for the defensive tackles. But any of the other one of those stick out to you?
Probably maybe the loss of Cam Bynum.
Yeah. As in terms of players, obviously the coaching staffs also
the
have
coaching staffs. Yeah, some of it is a little hard to say. We don't really know what it's going to be like going from Glenn to Shepard for the Lions.
Yeah,
we have a bit of an idea for the Bears with Dennis Allen.
Yeah, we've seen Dennis Allen coach good defenses before. Shepard is more of just he's an unknown. We don't really know what to make of him.
So for today's purposes, we'll just assume he's going to crash and burn.
Yeah, but look, we can hope, right? But anyway, let's. If there's nothing else you want to touch on there, should we move on to talking about breaking down each position group one by one? And do you want to talk a little bit more about our approach for how we broke down these position groups?
Right. So this is the third year we've done this, and we use basically the same methodology with maybe a couple tweaks. But we start with the sort of published depth charts for each team. And
Shout out
we
to
got
our
these
lads.
from our lads.
Yep.
And so then we find the snap count for that position of the depth chart. So like CB1, CB2, Edge 1, Edge 2, Edge 3, Edge 4, Edge 5. And so we assign a snap share for each player based on their position in the depth chart. And then we find the PFF grades from the most recent year. It's almost always the last year, though you might have cases where, like, when you do the offense, J.J. McCarthy, we have to treat him like a rookie in this case.
Yeah.
Sometimes you use somebody's play 2 years ago if they missed an entire year. But I think for this case, there's some rookies we'll talk about. And then the...
yeah, and we get the snap share from PFF as well, if we fail to mention that. But
right.
And then we do a special case for rookies. So when we have a rookie, we look at essentially what round and what position they were drafted in. And then we kind of essentially look at that. It's like, well, a 6th round defensive tackle usually grades out at about this. And so on average, they grade out around here. So we're going to say this guy is going to be an average 6th round defensive tackle or an average 2nd round corner or something like that. And that's how we kind of fill in our best guesstimate for what a rookie will contribute in year one.
Right. So, and this data is from 2018 to 2024 drafts. So we've got 7 years of draft data for. So I've got the matched up the grades with the draft position and the player position for these drafts. Then calculate the median score. There's some things that get a little wonky. Like as you get later in the draft, you start running into more and more players that have no grade at all because they didn't play.
Yeah.
Now those players we're not including in figuring out what the average are. We don't put in a bunch of zeros.
Yeah, because we're assuming that these players are going to play if they're on the depth chart within like the first 5 guys. And so that
we're figuring this is no longer a completely random sample. They're sampling for players who are expected to play by putting them in the depth chart. So that's one assumption we're making here. It's just actually improving the score probably a little bit for the later round players. As we do one tweak for the snap share distribution for the safety group in particular, where you basically assume that the top 2 safeties never leave the field if they're healthy. And so we give them sort of the top 2 safeties match the snap count of the top snap safety for it's safety 1 from last year. And then we only go 4 deep on safety, so the remaining snaps left over for the safety group get divided amongst the backups.
Yeah.
But the other players
and then we do have one other tweak as well, which is players who are projected to miss like a chunk of the season. So like Aleem McNeil, who got hurt, unfortunately, near the end of last year. We're kind of assuming he's going to end up missing, the first 7-8 weeks. And so we took what his projected snap share would be if he had played the whole season and then just cut it in half. And so assume he's going to play around maybe like 400 snaps as opposed to like 800 that he would have if he was available for the whole season.
Right. So he's kind of considered defensive tackle 1, but only available for half the season.
Yeah. And
otherwise, we are not predicting any injuries based on previous injuries. It's more that if we know somebody's unavailable from the start of the year.
Exactly.
Otherwise, the assumptions are all gone on health. We're not like, oh, this player tends to miss this many games. No, that's just way too deep in the weeds and way too much guesswork.
Yeah, and injuries year to year are never entirely sticky. So that's another thing where it's like a little bit hard to predict. But when players are currently recovering from an injury that is not
likely
going
to start on PUP.
Exactly. It's going to be tough for them to get back by the first week. Then we figure, hey, we know this. We should incorporate that into our numbers. But that's kind of how it works. We're looking at essentially snapshare weighted PFF grades. And PFF grades, like we've said a million times before, are not a perfect measure of, how good or bad someone is. But it's a nice catch-all stat that essentially captures a little bit. It captures the idea of how well a player played. It's not always perfect for every player, but over the course of a season, it's kind of it gets it more right often than not, even though it's not a perfect number and no one's pretending that it is, but it's a decent catch-all stat.
Yeah, and what we end up with is a weighted average PFF grade per position group is the short way of saying these last whatever 5 to 10 minutes. So the TLDR,
is snap share weighted grades essentially, and then looking at that for each position group. But speaking of those position groups, let's start off with the first one, and let's look at how the defensive tackle rooms compare to one another going into 2025. And unfortunately, a little bit of a teaser for this entire list. The Packers are not near the top of this list in many of these position groups. But how does the defensive tackle group kind of stack out there, Dad?
Yeah, so the way it starts is the Lions are far and away the best. Even with, Aleem McNeil and his elite grade only contributing half as many snaps as he would if he started the year healthy. Their average score or grade is 68. And then the other three teams are grouped together a little bit more closely. There's a 7-point drop down to the Vikings at 61, the Bears about 61, the Packers at 59. So Packers are last, but it's kind of close, relatively close to the Vikings and Bears, and all three significantly behind the Lions.
Yeah, and so this is kind of just to talk a little bit about how this might, shake out differently. There are a few different ways I think that this could vary from what our predictions are, and figure we'd, talk about that a little bit, because on paper, I would say the Lions definitely have the strongest of the defensive tackle groups. We're also expecting a pretty good season from Tyleik Williams. Like a 65 grade is definitely an above average season, is kind of what we're predicting for first round defensive tackles. So we're expecting them to have a pretty good impact, although we do only have him fourth on their depth chart behind guys like McNeil, Reeder, and Onwuzurike. Maybe he ends up playing more, maybe he ends up playing less. We'll see. But because they also brought in nose tackle Roy Lopez and free agency, who's also an addition for them. So you'd assume that they would want him to play a decent amount as well. A couple ways, though, that I think this could go differently. Javon Hargrave and Jonathan Allen are both two pretty big additions for the Vikings, both coming off of not great years, both coming off of some of the worst years that they've had in their career. Now, Hargrave is a different instance because he also is coming off of a torn tricep. So we'll see how healthy he is coming into the season and how much that affects his play. So it's possible that lowers his play even a little bit more. But it's equally possible that both those guys, under defensive coordinator Brian Flores, who I think, you and I were talking about, if not the best defensive coordinator in the league, at least one of the top 3 defensive coordinators in the league, it's possible he gets the best play out of those guys that they've had in the past couple of years. And they both kind of jump back to the players that they were 2 to 3 years ago. And if they do, I mean, those two on the opposite sides of nose tackle Harrison Phillips, that could end up being a defensive tackle room that rivals the Lions for the best one. Now, if you want to say some positive spin for the Packers as well, I want to say you can kind of actually say something similar for the Packers with Kenny Clark and the Bears with Grady Jarrett. Both those guys, veteran defensive tackles coming off of maybe not their best years. There's certainly possible that, Kenny, coming off of what we learned was a foot injury that required surgery to his toe, and that was hampering him a large stretch of last year. And then Grady Jarrett maybe just going to a new place, playing, with some better players, because let's be honest, the Falcons defensive line has been a little bit wanting for several years now, and he's been kind of the only guy there. It's possible he has
more wanting now.
Exactly. It's possible he has a bounce back year after last year, because we're going off of the grades from last season. So it's possible, just kind of put that idea out there, that those guys, all 4 of those guys, end up with bounce back seasons and end up closing the gap a little bit between where they are in our projections and where the Lions are in our projections.
Yeah. If you want to add just one more little bit of, I'll call it storytelling at this point. Fair. For the Packers defensive tackle room. We've talked about this in the offseason before, about the improvement in the second half of the year for the defensive front of the Packers.
And you'll notice he will this thing that my dad is doing, where he keeps being like, well, if you look after the bye, the defense is this good. You'll notice he never does any of the, well, if you look after the bye, the offense, you will never hear him reference any post-bye offense numbers. You only look at the whole season for the offense, but the defense,
maybe the offense didn't have a bye. It just all goes smoothly through the whole year.
Exactly. But anyway, the defense post-bye, it was better.
The pass rush in particular got better after the bye for most of the players. And so if you look at that,
yeah, if only we could play the Saints and the Seahawks a third of the time, every single year. We played the Seahawks without their tackles.
We did play the Titans and the Colts in the first half of the year.
Yeah, but that was like 2 out of 9 games as opposed to like
well,
2
you
out
just
of
referred to
6
2
games. And well, that was 2 out of 6. You were looking at a third of the sample is the Seahawks with no offensive with like a bunch of their offensive linemen injured, and then the Saints when they had pretty much packed it in.
No, it's week 11 through the wild card game because I'm including the wild card game.
Oh, okay, you're including the playoff.
So we're
game?
talking
Right.
8. We're talking 8 games.
Okay, all right.
So it's I think it's all right. Or it's 9 and 9 actually.
Okay,
it's evenly split. It's not like so the sample.
That's true. The Titans game and the Colts game was not as much. The Titans game though, that's like.
But we're talking about bad teams. You're talking about bad teams.
Yeah, but anyway, I would just say when you like actually go down, because we were talking about this with Lucas Van Ness, when you go down to like look at where the pressures, it's like, oh, like half of these pressures were these 2 games against the Saints and the Seahawks. But anyway, continue.
But the overall defensive tackle group grade improves to 63 instead of 59, which moves them up to 2nd instead of 4th. And most of those improvements are Clark and Wyatt getting much better. Wooden actually got slightly worse. And we also did mention that, the Packers have their own
rookie
addition. Rookie.
How much? Okay, well,
Brinson, but it's like contributing very little.
Yeah,
he's playing the fewest snaps. And his grade's not good. It's not like he's lifting the projected grade for a 6th round defensive tackle is 49.5.
And the other thing
that's
with
not
Warren
improving
Brinson,
anybody's group.
The other thing with Warren Brinson, majorly behind the 8 ball because he has not he didn't practice at all in OTAs or in minicamp. Maybe the end of minicamp he did come back for a little bit actually. Now that I think about it, but he was pretty much not available for wide stretches of the offseason program so far. So he's fighting a bit of an uphill battle there to get in that defensive tackle rotation.
Yeah, I don't know what it would. I've never tried to calculate the projected grade for an undrafted free agent
nose
player.
Tackle. I mean,
right.
It's a bigger sample size.
What would be the expected grade for an UDFA nose tackle if Nazir Stackhouse?
I think you would just run into a big sample of players, but probably a small sample of players who actually played any significant snaps. Like there's probably a ton of them that played like
you just
a
have
dozen
to find
snaps.
all the players who played like some snaps. Yeah.
At least like 50 or maybe at least 100. But like, yeah, I think you'd hard pressed to find like a big group. Oh yeah, huge mess. But anyway, so defensive tackle room, I think there is room for these teams to close the gap with the Lions. But from the Packers' point of view, I don't see a scenario unless we run into like Wyatt career year, like plays out of his mind. Like that's the only, I think, way that you could get the Packers in that like top 2 conversation. Because on paper, I think the Lions are clearly better. The Vikings, if they get bounce back years from those 2 guys, are clearly better. And then I think the Bears and the Packers are kind of like down a tier from those 2 teams.
See, I don't know if there's that much difference between saying the Vikings are going to get 2 players to bounce back versus the Packers have Kenny Clark and Wyatt.
Yeah,
better.
But if the Vikings have 2 players bounce back, I would say those are their 2nd and 3rd guys on the depth chart. Where it's like Harrison Phillips, as opposed to 1st and 2nd. That's kind of like how I'm viewing it. Because like they're like you could argue like the top 2 is comparable. Their 3rd guy is like a pretty big jump ahead of either Wooden or Brooks, unless Brooks like takes that jump that we were hoping he'd take in his 2nd year and like plays like, because like he had a good rookie season and then kind of took a step back last year, and then maybe he's more in this 3rd year, but also maybe this defensive scheme just doesn't fit him. And there's a lot of question marks around the defensive tackle group for the Packers, but there are also a lot of question marks around the edge group for the Packers, so we might as well move on to their next. How do we stack up in that one? Because I'm guessing it's not great.
Right. So the edge rusher group, just the overall rankings is Vikings 1st, then Lions, then Bears, and Packers 4th again.
Yeah.
And the Vikings and Lions are kind of close together, 73 and 71 grades. And then there's a drop to the Bears at 64 and the Packers at 62.9.
Yeah.
The Packers basically, their group is, we just use top 4 players unchanged. So I should say the defensive tackle group, we went 5 deep. The edge rusher group, we're going 4 deep. And we are expecting, this is, after watching last year's pass rush, this shouldn't be a surprise of where the Packers are in this group if you use the whole season.
And it's I would say the biggest question around the Packers right now is like, is there hope for the pass rush? And we're also looking at it because so far, it's been Van Ness taking most of the snaps opposite Gary in OTAs. So we're putting him 2nd in the depth chart, even though Enagbury played more than him last year.
Yeah. And so we've got just Gary, Van Ness, Agbury, and then Brenton Cox. We've left as number
ahead
4.
of Sorrell right now because
Right now.
I mean, Brenton Cox.
And I think that's
really good. Brenton Cox really.
The depth chart was last year. I mean, Brenton Cox was like our best pass rusher in the second half of the year.
I almost put him ahead of an Agbury. It just felt like a little bit, maybe a little too much hope there. But I did almost think, like, is there any like chance he just jumps him right away? Because he was a better pass rusher than him last year, and he was showing some stuff. And also, and Agbury is on the last year of his deal, so that's kind of another piece to that. But kind of looking at it, I mean, it makes sense that it makes sense for certain that the Vikings are number one because Van Ginkel is coming off a career year. Grenard's a very solid player. Dallas Turner had maybe a bit of a disappointing year for a first-round pick that they traded up for, but he's still a first-round pick going into his second year. And then I'm going to be honest with you, I've never heard of Bo Richter, but whatever. He's their fourth guy. I have not heard of that man once in my life. I'm a little bit surprised to see the Lions so high. And I do think part of that is just the Aiden Hutchinson factor, and he's buoying a lot of that. His grade is ridiculously good. That's why.
Yes. It is so high. I mean, I should say that a lot of these averages, when a team finishes well, it is often driven by elite players because their grades are so much higher than the average.
And to be fair,
up the entire group, which is probably
like real life, I would say.
Like real life, right?
Yeah, when you have one elite pass rusher, it can really make a difference for a group. I think the question for the Lions is, what does Hutchinson look like this year? He has had like almost a full. He will, by the time the season starts, he will have had almost a full year off. And there was noise that like, hey, if they had gotten to the Super Bowl, he would have been able to play. So an extra 6-7 months after that of rest and recovery certainly could get him back to full strength. But it was a major injury. I mean, he broke his leg pretty severely. It was a pretty nasty injury, long road to recovery. And there's a chance that like even if there was already a chance that he would have just naturally regressed from his pace last year because he was just playing out of his mind. Like it was some absurd number of pressures per game where he was essentially averaging. Let's see, how many pressures per game was he averaging at that point? I can pull it up really quick. He had 45 pressures over 5 games. So he was averaging 9 pressures a game, which is just like unheard of. So, because like, I mean, that would have probably shattered the record for pressures in a season. Those numbers are per PFF. So there was already a chance he would have naturally regressed down from those numbers just based on, you're not going to peak every single year. But add to that the injury, I think there's a chance that they're a little bit worse. And yes, they got good play, like solid play from guys like Al-Qadim Muhammad and Josh Pascal last year. But I don't think either of those guys would be considered impact guys. And then Marcus Davenport, who is second on their depth chart right now in the edge room. Now, there's always a chance they re-sign Zadarius Smith. He's still out there. But Marcus Davenport, I mean, he's never really been a very impact player himself either. So a lot of this is kind of coming down to how much can Aiden Hutchinson look like the Aiden Hutchinson we saw last year with, battling through injury and then also just natural regression on like, hey, no one averages 9 pressures a game.
Yes. And so the other thing is you mentioned like Van Ginkel having like a career year. Yeah. How often is somebody on a career year a regression candidate? So that's another thing to consider.
I do think that, yes, sometimes like you're not going to have your career year every year. I do think that the added context of that being the first year of his career in that scheme, and there's like the chance like, hey, maybe he's just like, this is how he would always play if he was always asked to play this role. Like there's a little bit of signal there as well.
Isaiah Simmons, all pro.
No.
First year in this system.
I'm going to stop you right there. No, I'm going to tell you right now.
I'm just taking your logic to its, logical conclusion.
Isaiah Simmons, the only way Isaiah Simmons Isaiah Simmons is
special team Pro Bowler.
I was going to say is more likely to make the special teams as a Pro Bowler than he is to be like a true impact, like every down linebacker, in my opinion. Because I love the signing because I think he's going to be elite as a special teamer. And we need more good special teamers. But I think you're selling yourself something if you think he's going to be like an impact linebacker after 6 years in the league, 7 years in the league.
I think this is just pure Gatorade. I think I'm okay.
Yeah,
maybe you just blame the COVID.
As the COVID brain is really cooking for you. Beyond that, though, just sticking with the edge room for a second. The only way the Packers make a big jump up these rankings is if LVN hits a level we've never seen him hit before, right?
I think so. Though I wonder what it would look like if he even gets if his grade becomes just as good as Cox was last year, it'd be a huge improvement, actually, for the group.
It's always a question of like, can you scale up that kind of production?
Well, that's what I was saying. If his grade, not that Cox takes over the position, but if Van Ness just plays as well as Cox did last year, I mean, that's like that would raise the Packers group overall.
What's your confidence in LVN this year? Because we've already talked about this in a previous podcast. It's like the number of players who have had as few pressures and as low of a pressure rate as LVN through 2 years.
Your list was not inspiring.
It's three guys. It's like Felix Anudike-Uzomah. It's the guy from the Seahawks whose name I forget.
I forget the name.
LJ Collier. It was LJ Collier, and I don't even remember the third. I was like, oh goodness, I don't even remember the third guy. But it was like three dudes who either are no longer edge rushers, or like
are no longer in the
league. You think of guys who are busts. Clellan Ferrell had more pressures and a higher pressure rate.
I was going to say these guys, the guys you're talking about, are below the standard bust. You know who's not this low. I mean, these guys are all probably better than
who?
Ja'Kai Polite.
Probably, yes. But Ja'Kai Polite was not a first rounder, thankfully, because he would have gone to the Packers.
He was on the verge. He was like supposed to be a first rounder for a while.
If he didn't tank like the entire preseason process or pre-draft process, he probably would have been a first rounder. But that's how these things. That's the way the cookie crumbles sometimes.
Yeah, it's like a Shakespearean tragedy the way he fell.
And then in terms of like looking at some of the other teams in the NFC North, Montez Sweat had a bit of a down year last year after having a great year going to the Bears the year prior. So, and it was kind of a bit of a mess after they fired their coach who was calling plays on the defense. So then
you can no longer blame that scheme on this coming year.
Yeah, but like also he had played well in that scheme, and then they fired the coach, so I think he didn't do as like their whole defense was not as good after firing Eberflus, even though it was the right decision to fire him. So I think there's a bit of that as well. So bringing in Dennis Allen, I think we'll probably get a little bit better year out of Montez Sweat. We don't know what Odeyingbo is going to look like in this system, but he was a guy I think both of us were relatively high on in terms of available free agents. So there's a chance both those guys have a solid year at edge. And the more I talk about it, the more I'm like, yeah, it makes sense for the Packers to be ranked fourth in this group. And, there's a chance Gary has a bounce back year, second year system. And I actually thought Gary played decently last year. It's just he had no help at all along that defensive line, but just not enough quick pressures from him, in my opinion. Anything else in the edge group you want to touch on, or should we move on to the next one?
Yeah. When even you do like the second half of the season, rose-colored glasses or green.
Yeah. What does that look like there?
It still only moves up to third.
Yeah. I was going to say, even if you take their best games, I was going to say it's still probably not great, huh? Yeah,
I need to be a little more selective in which games I pick.
I was going to say, if you just look at the Titans, the
Seahawks,
and
the Saints game, and
they might be the best.
That's clearly
they'd probably still just be second, honestly. Like if we're looking at it,
that's clearly what their true nature is.
Yeah, but anyway, let's move on to the linebacker room. What do the rankings look like there? Packers aren't last in this one, at least.
No, and they're a little lower than I expected, though. I'll talk about. So the Lions are first at 74 essentially, so really good. Vikings are a step below that at 68, and then the Bears and Packers are kind of close together. Packers third at 62, and the Bears at 61 essentially. And the Packers, they're mostly lifted up by Edgerrin Cooper's fantastic year.
And I think what you wanted to point out was I made the judgment call to put Cooper second in the depth chart because I still think they're going to have Quay call the plays, and I think it might be a mistake to have Cooper call the plays because it'd slow him down a little bit. So I still think Quay is going to be the number one guy, but pitch it to me that Cooper is the number one guy. Like convince me.
Well, besides the fact that he's
better,
everything,
than
everything. The other thing that you did is you went by what the Packers practices have been doing and had Simmons as the number 4 linebacker instead of Hopper, who is listed on the public depth chart as the number 4. Just putting Hopper in there actually improves the position by 3 points.
Yeah.
On
which
average, so it like jumps up,
move
from
them all the way
62
from third
to
to third. Yeah, a huge 3 to cut the lead to 30 to move us from third to third there. But yes, anyway, it would make us better.
And if you look at the second half of the year for that group, Walker is much better. I mean, his grade goes from 57 to 70.
Well, it felt like at the second half of last year, and then unfortunately he had that ankle injury. I can't remember. I think it was against the Seahawks. I can't remember. But before that ankle injury, it was like he was playing the best ball of his career. Now, the question for the linebacker group is, how much does losing Campanile, who went to go be the head coach,
that is going to be a big question going into the season, what that group is going to look like now, because I thought they were really playing well.
Yeah, he went to go be the defensive coordinator of the Jaguars under new head coach Liam Cohen. And they're hiring Dugan, who had been there as one of the assistant defensive coaches, who had coached with Jeff Hafley before. So there's some familiarity there. But you got I don't think it's a coincidence that Campanile, who was very well thought of as a linebacker coach and immediately got a defensive coordinator job, I don't think it's a coincidence you immediately got career season out of Quay Walker, all rookie team for Edgerrin Cooper, and great role player seasons, I would say, for who they are, out of McDuffie and Eric Wilson. I don't think it's
Wilson
a coincidence.
Had a great year.
Yeah, Wilson had a great year. I don't think it's a coincidence that
was very
all
solid.
of a sudden you bring in a new linebacker coach who's super well thought of and immediately gets hired as a DC, and all your linebackers play out of their mind. It would unfortunately not be surprising to me if that group took a step back this year.
It is possible the coaching. If you think about how they just improved, like last year, if they got used to the system, they move up to with Hopper in there and Cooper and Walker playing like they did the second half of the season, second best in the group with a grade of 70. We're talking about an 8-point swing for that position group. It's a huge difference in that position group. So it all depends on whether you think that is sustainable and that is a trend going forward, and is more. So the question is, what's more predictive of this coming year? How they finish the second half of the year, and it's half the year, or is the full season more predictive of next year?
Or
that's the story you're trying to. That's the story I'm trying to tell myself.
Yeah, and Edgerrin Cooper played great as a rookie, but we've seen a lot of these players, have good rookie seasons and then sophomore slumps. Can we get? And he's apparently put on some good weight and still looks just as fast, but a little bit heavier. How will that affect his play, though? Something we don't know. And will he undergo the sophomore slump that a lot of these players have had, or will he build on last year? Hopefully, he builds on last year. And then just looking around the rest of the NFC North, rest of the division. There's some places with a decent amount of investment at the linebacker position. Jack Campbell was a first-round pick. Blake Cashman was brought in as a free agent by the Vikings. And the Bears, even though they're ranked fourth in this linebacker group, have a lot of money sewn up in both Tremaine Edmonds and TJ Edwards.
It's funny to see them end up last, and they might be spending the most amount of money. Are they first in the league in linebacker spending?
It's a good question. Off the top of my head,
because they have two big contracts.
They do,
right?
And I'm trying to think. It's there aren't that many other defenses in the league that are just built around two linebackers. If I'm thinking about it, Fred Warner, obviously highly paid, but the guys next to him aren't super highly paid.
Right. So a couple of years ago, you had three teams. You had more teams that were doing that with it, but now
because I was going to say the Ravens had Roquan Smith and then had Patrick Queen. But Patrick Queen went over to the Steelers, so he's not there anymore. And
Dre Greenlaw is not on the Niners anymore.
Yeah,
you had Levante David and
Devin White, but Devin White's not on Tampa anymore. So yeah, they're just not a whole lot of double linebacker, two high paid linebackers groups in the league anymore. And it's not like TJ Edwards is super highly paid. Tremaine Edmonds was. I don't know how he even ranks anymore because that contract was a few years ago. But it is a little bit interesting that they've invested a lot in that group and have not quite gotten up in the rankings there. Although, to be fair, like we said, a lot of these defensive numbers are probably impacted for the Bears by the fact that they fired the guy who was in charge of their defense halfway through the year last year. So there's a chance they have just a natural bounce back from having more continuity. And then also Dennis Allen, I think, is a defensive coordinator who a lot of people think really highly of and has been a good defensive coordinator in the league for a long time. Anything else you wanted to touch on with the linebacker group? I feel like this one is kind of the most makes sense. The rankings make sense. Jack Campbell, I think, is going into his third year, which is kind of like a standard, breakout year for linebackers. Now, remember, they took him in the first round, so I think they're hoping for, good things out of him.
Yeah. Well,
so yeah, he's going into his third year.
How that goes.
Yeah.
I thought they would be clustered more tightly together than they are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
there's a little bit more spread from the Lions to the Bears than I would have predicted.
Yeah, I can see that, especially when you just look on paper. And, there's a little less spread if you put Hopper in there for Simmons, but it does seem like through OTAs and minicamp that Simmons has the early lead on that fourth linebacker spot behind McDuffie. And I guess we also didn't mention the Packers brought McDuffie back, but did not bring Eric Wilson back, who did end up with the Vikings. So there's a little bit of a trade
currently
there.
Listed as the Vikings' number 3 linebacker.
Yeah, and you can say, I can't believe he went over the Vikings. Well, he was with the Vikings first, so it went to the Vikings to us and then back to the Vikings. So it's a bit of a he's going back home.
It's not the usual pattern of Packers over players leaving for the Vikings.
Exactly. Corner room. How's that shaken out?
So this one is in some ways a little bit interesting. You have the Bears as number 1 with a grade of 70, and then the other 3 teams are close to the Vikings second at 64, Packers third at 61.2, and the Lions last at 60.4. And that's with the addition of DJ Reed. So people might be surprised that the Packers aren't last in the corner group.
Not us. We've been telling you all offseason the corner room is probably fine. I'm not at all surprised to see how high the Bears are, because Jalen Johnson and Kyler Gordon are both really good. And then Tyreek Stevenson is solid. But Kyler Gordon's one of the better nickels in the league. And then Jalen Johnson's one of the better outside corners in the league. Vikings bringing back Byron Murphy was a big thing for them. You initially had him lower on the depth chart. You had him third, and I was like, nope, got to move him up because he's clearly the number 1 guy. I mean, he played the most snaps from them last year. He plays outside in the 2 corner sets and then inside in the 3 corner sets. So he played a good split of I think it was 600 outside corner snaps and then 300 slot corner snaps. So he's playing all over the field for them. So he's a really big impact player. I think the question for the Packers is, what does Hobbs look like as the outside guy? We have Bullard in the corner room in this permutation of the depth chart,
right?
Which
as do both, I think ESPN and our lads.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like he is going to be the nickel, at least in big nickel looks, and I'm totally for that. It is kind of funny though that am I right that Carrington Valentine was their highest graded corner, and now he's 4th on the depth chart?
That's right, and he was by far their best coverage grade. This is overall grade. I haven't broken down the position groups by pass rush grade, coverage grade, run defense grade, etc.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the overall grade. But Valentine was their best, and it depends on who you look at for the depth chart. I've seen some where Valentine is an outside starter, Hobbs is in the nickel, and Bullard is the number 4 corner, which would change this overall grade a bit if that was the case. Yeah,
but I think it's going to be Bullard in the slot. And then the other thing that I think is interesting is for the Lions, I think there's a chance that they really move up of this because Terry and Arnold last year did not grade out very well. Committed a lot of penalties, didn't have the best year, but he is still a first-round corner going into his second year. And one thing we do know about corner is it is a position that can take some time to learn. There can be a heavy adjustment period from college to the NFL. And so there's a chance that he, has a natural progression from being he's graded in the 50s, which is below average, which again, PFF grades, not perfect, but he graded well below average last year. There's a chance that he makes a decently sized jump. And then you look at maybe a corner room with Reed on one side, Arnold on the other, and then Amik Robertson in the slot. And you look at that as possibly a, difference making unit as opposed to one that is ranked 4th in the division right now.
Yeah. And another one of their corners was also rookie last year, Rakestraw.
Yeah, he just barely played.
And he had a terrible grade last year.
And he didn't play much. They were kind of playing guys like Kendall Vildor, who's no longer with the team, over him. They were playing guys over him, even though he was a 2nd-round pick, I believe, out of Missouri.
Yes, 2nd round. Look at last year's notes, how I gave him a score. So he underperformed what his predicted score was, as did Arnold for the Lions going into last year's defense.
Yeah, but again, corner can be a tough one to jump into the league and have impact right away. The other thing with the Vikings is, losing Stephon Gilmore and bringing in Isaiah Rodgers and Jeff Okudah, it's a gamble right there because you are kind of hoping that Okudah... The thing with Okudah is, he just never really lived up to that 3rd overall pick, draft value. I was going to say draft compensation, draft value. But maybe, Brian Flores, better DC, knows how to use him more. Maybe he finally does live up to that, that draft pick. So we'll see. We'll see. There's a chance for these
maybe
corners.
dialing up all kinds of crazy pressure will let him thrive a little bit more.
And I think, the big takeaway here is the Packers corner room looks fine when you look at it compared to the rest of the division. It's not as high as the Bears is, but the Bears have a lot of, investment there. And it's only a little bit behind the Vikings and just a tad bit ahead of the Lions, but it's right there in the mix there for, that second, third, fourth spot. So it's right there in the mix. It's not a disaster like some people would have you believe, losing Jair. And obviously it's not ideal not having Jair on the team, but they managed to, withstand not having him for good chunks of the year last year. And then they added Hobbs on top of that. So.
Yeah. So it lacks, I think this is the lack of star power that has people.
Yeah, I mean,
worried.
If you want a full deep dive into what we think the corner room is going to look like, just go back. I think it's last episode, maybe 2 episodes ago, where we talk about the corner room for the Packers and what it's going to look like and what it looked like for stretches without Jair last year and what it might look like with Hobbs. So go check that out. But anyway, finishing things up here, the safety room. I was hoping that we would see the Packers first, but we do not. We see them in a tight second.
There was a chance they would be first, but the Lions safety group had a crazy good year last year.
I mean, Brian Branch and Kirby Joseph both had very good years.
Yeah, excellent grades for both of them. So McKinney, I think, was as good as the two of them, but Evan Williams' grade was not quite as good. So it didn't. Yeah. They didn't get up to quite the overall group of the 4 safeties.
Yeah, Williams had a good year for a rookie, but and a good year, but not as high level as
not
either
elite,
Branch or Joseph.
Like Branch, Joseph, and McKinney had. So the Lions were first with 81.6 grade. It's like elite grade for an entire group.
For an entire position group, which is pretty
kind of crazy. The Packers are 78, so that's also really, really good. You notice that I think these are maybe the 2 highest grades for any of the position groups for any team. Yeah, by a significant margin. The next best was like 73. So the safety groups for the Packers and the Lions are way better than any other groups in the division. The Bears and Vikings are significantly lower. Bears at 69 and the Vikings down at 65.7.
Yeah.
So you see the Vikings are hurt by probably the loss of Cam
Bynum.
Cam Bynum. So that was probably significantly affecting their overall grade this year. I don't remember what they were last year, but I'm sure.
And the thing with the Vikings also, Harrison Smith is 37, 38 years old now. So that's like another piece of the puzzle. 36, sorry to sell you short, Harrison Smith. 36 years old, but still very old.
Maybe he'll turn 37 this year.
He turns 37 in February. So he'll be 36 for this whole year.
So he's 36 for the entire year.
But looking at it, I think one thing for the Packers is, like we talked about with the corners, we're classifying Bullard as a corner.
We're not including him we're not including him in both groups, just the corner.
Maybe he ends up as safety 3. Like if Williams misses time, maybe they put Bullard back to safety and then play a 3-corner look with Valentine, Hobbs, and Nixon. I think that that's certainly possible. Now, last year they said that they felt like they put too much on Bullard's plate, playing him at safety and slot corner and bouncing him around too much, and they thought that was maybe a little much for him. So maybe they don't do that this year. We saw last year when Zane Anderson and Ketan Oladapo had to come in, they played pretty well. So I would not mind seeing just those guys play a little bit more there and just letting Bullard stick at one spot and see how he does as a nickel. But that's one thing to think about. And then for the Bears, we have Jaquan Brisker first in their depth chart. He did miss over a month last year with a concussion. So the question is is that going to be another problem that pops up? But when he plays, he is quite good.
Yeah. And overall, this is a group we could feel good about for the Packers. And maybe, Bullard doesn't need to be in the group. We're happy with the play we got. Actually, everybody played well. There's a thing that not only did they have elite play at the top, but nobody in the group had a bad year either.
Yeah, and to be fair, Oladapo only played really one game. He really only played against the Bears, I think it was, in that last week of the year, and he played pretty well, but he only played that one game, so small sample size. Zane Anderson had a little bit more snaps, but still not a ton. And then a big chunk of the safety snaps were actually Bullard, but we're moving him to corner and ostensibly moving him to corner.
We also think about the depth of the corner room because they've lost 3 corners from that group.
Yeah. I mean, the question to me is less what the corner starters look like and more what the corner depth looks like. But again, we talked about this in the previous episode. Most teams do not have a great corner 4, corner 5. It's most teams are wanting at that position.
And also to say about the small sample size, that's true when you get to the bottom of the depth chart for any of these positions in any team. It always gets a little bit noisy.
Yeah, and so another thing for the the Lions safeties. Right now, third on the depth chart is a 7th-round rookie for them, so they're maybe a little bit thin there. Although they are, their 2 starting guys are really strong, but I would say their third guy is probably weaker than any of the other 3 teams in the North. So the depth is a little bit shaky there for them.
Yeah, their third is a 7th-round rookie, and their 4th did not have a good year last year.
Yeah,
and so
question marks on the depth there.
So they don't have much injury protection, you would say.
Exactly.
Generally, in the normal course of things, your top 2 safeties are just running all day
when they can. Yeah, exactly.
And if they don't get hurt,
and like we said, we're not
occasionally have a 3 safety look, but that's not that many snaps.
And like we said, we're not predicting injury, so like we're not really keeping that in mind. But it is important to keep in mind, like at some point your depth will have to play, but that's just something to take a look at later. In terms of wrapping things up here, Dad, overall defense, how'd the Packers stack out? I'm guessing based on the positions we've looked at, probably not super high.
So yeah, Lions are first. So if you look either at the overall player grade average or the sum of the rank of the player group within the division, Lions are first with an average player grade of 71 and an average position group rank of 1.8. Vikings are second with a player grade of 66.6 and an average position group rank of 2.2. So slightly worse than 2. Bears are third, and the Packers are fourth. Average position group rank of 3.2. So they had, the Packers had 2 4s, 2 3s, and 1 2. The Lions, meanwhile, had three number 1 positions. Vikings had 1 number 1 position, and the Bears had 1 number 1 position. So Packers are pretty clearly last.
Yeah.
If you take like the improvement the Packers had in the second half of the year, it gets them up to second. They still don't end up with any number 1 groups, but they no longer have any number 4s either. If that's their true trajectory. There we go. I knew that word was in there somewhere. So they could, be anywhere from second to fourth, probably. Unlikely to get up to first.
Yeah. And, it is just one thing I want to point out. That last year, despite like us saying like, oh, they're ranked last in all these position groups. Last year, the Packers were 7th in DVOA on defense. Now, Minnesota was number 1 and Detroit was number 5. But the Packers were 7th. So like the Packers were a very good defense last year. So that is just something to keep in mind.
This is true. Ranking like somewhere between 2nd and 4th in this division does not mean it's bad.
Yeah. It's just that it's the strongest division in the league. And I think that's kind of bears out over like this episode and the next one is like, I mean, what other divisions are close? I would say the AFC West, the NFC West, and the NFC East, and maybe the AFC North.
I was going to say the AFC. The AFC North has 3 good teams
and 1 just absolute bottom of the barrel team. But like that's the thing with why I wouldn't put the AFC North there, and that's why they're not quite in that same tier. That's why the NFC East is not quite in that same tier because the Giants. I don't know if you've seen recently. Some people are like gassing up the Giants recently. Like, I don't see that in the future,
thinking...
but like that they're going to be good, like make the playoffs. I'm like, Jackson Dart would have to have like a legendary rookie season for that to happen, in my opinion. Or Russell Wilson.
You don't think they're doing that with Russ?
I would be surprised. I mean, the point of that they're making, like we're getting on a tangent here, is like their D line is like that good that it could just totally take over. And like, I guess, but there are just so many other question marks. And then the NFC West, I just think the Cardinals are not going to be great this year. I think the Cardinals will be fine. I think the Seahawks will be fine. I also don't think
the Seahawks are going to be that good.
I think they're going to be fine.
Them to step down.
But I don't think either are going to win less than 7 or 6 games. So like that is that. I don't think
they'll be terrible, but they're not.
I don't think they'll be terrible. They're not like Browns or Giants, like bad.
Or Saints
or Saints. But like I was just comparing to the divisions we already talked about. And then the AFC West, I actually think the AFC West can be really good this year. I mean, obviously you got the Chiefs who've won that division however many times in a row. You got the Chargers who made the playoffs last year. I think that you got the Broncos who made the playoffs last year. I think the Raiders are going to be good. That's my like big take coming in this year. Obviously I'm a Geno believer. I think the Raiders are going to be quite good. I think the Raiders are going to be better than the Broncos. Like that's my take this year. But I'm getting it on recording. I've already told you this a couple times. I'm recording it now. I think the Raiders are going to have a better record than the Broncos. But anyway, so all that is to say though that, having a low ranked defense relative to the division, I mean, they were third in the division last year, and they were still top 10 in DVOA. So it's like, yeah, it might not be great when you look at compared to these other teams, but it's just a really strong division is another thing to keep in mind.
Right. So that's something we got to remember. Don't be too. I mean, I always feel like, oh man, we're down at the bottom again.
Yeah, but
all these grades average across the position group. For every team, there's only like one that was below 60.
Yeah, it's a strong division. And honestly, I think that the Packers, like, and a big question is, like, can Hafley do this twice in a row? Like, after a year of having this stuff on tape, will it be a year of all this stuff is on tape and so teams are ready for it? Or will it be a year of, practice and reps in the system and the players will be better? Like, it can go one of two ways. And we saw previously Joe Barry had a solid year in his first year. I think they were like 12th in DVOA, and then they never ranked above like 23rd under his reign for the next like couple years. Is it going to be a similar thing where like the best year is the first year for Hafley and then they get a little bit worse each year? Or is this going to be like a springboard to something more next year where like the edge rushers are more used to the scheme and like we're getting, more production out of some young players? I guess we'll see. I think it could go either way, and that's the fun of it. And there's a lot of changes on the coaching staffs for 3 of these teams. So there's, changes there as well.
I'm sure I want to believe that the Packers are, destined for great things.
The X-Files. I want to believe.
I want to believe. But anyway, any last things you wanted to throw in here, Dad, or should we wrap this thing up? I think we can wrap this up. I think I've been throwing enough stuff out there already.
I was going to say enough numbers, enough stats. But anyway, this has been the defensive preview for the NFC North for 2025. Packers, unfortunately, by our projections, are going to be, about 4th, somewhere in that 3rd, 4th range. But there are definitely avenues, like we talked about, for them to overcome our projections, whether that's LVN having a big breakout year, whether that's Kenny Clark having a big bounce back year, whether that's, Nate Hobbs playing really, really well as an outside corner, whether that's jumps from guys like Javon Bullard, Evan Williams, stuff like that. There are all these avenues for them to be better than we're projecting. But right now we're projecting them around somewhere in that 3rd, 4th range for defenses in the
second
NFC
to
North.
4th, because the Lions are clearly like with an average score of like 71, and the other 3 are very tightly clustered together.
And there's always a chance the Lions take a step back with, having a new defensive coordinator, defensive play caller who's never done the job before. So that's also, something to keep in mind as well. A lot of these things are in flux, but on paper, we are unfortunately projecting the Packers to be one of the lower ranked teams on defense in the division. What do we think about their offense in the division, though? Check that out next week. We'll be talking about all of that going forward, and we'll be previewing the offenses in the NFC North next week. A lot of fun stuff to talk about. A lot of changes around the division, whether that's, new play callers for teams like the Bears and the Lions, new quarterback for the Vikings. All this stuff will be very interesting to talk about. We'll be talking about that next week. Check us out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. Subscribe, leave a comment, leave a review, tell a friend. Follow us on Blue Sky at Father Son Packers so you get that notification for when that episode drops, and updates on all other Packers related news, whether that's roster moves, coaching hires, when training camp is, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, thank you again so much for listening, and until next time, go Pack Go.
Go Pack Go.